When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band that kept
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not
one small step for man. Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show today. Today we're talking about the signers of the Declaration of Independence. 56 men who decided to be a great idea to poke the most powerful empire on earth with a stick, then sign their names to prove it. They're not anonymous rebels, they're not masked rioters, actual names written in ink saying, hell yeah, we're all in. I'm your host, Jeff. I'm the non-operating operator here on Our Republic, and I'm excited about this because we're going to talk about those men today that gave everything, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Let's get right into it, right? These were not random drunk colonists stumbling in after a tavern brawl, although the Republic was debated, formed, and talked about in pubs all over. I can't remember their names. One of them was like Dragon, something like the Green Dragon or something. It was a really cool name. Anyway, it sounds like something from Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, or maybe that's from Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. I don't remember. Anyway, they were lawyers, farmers, doctors, merchants, ministers, and scholars. The colonial version of the Avengers, if I might say, with powdered wigs instead of spandex. The youngest signer, Edward Rutledge, was just 26 years old, and he was barely out of law school. The oldest, Benjamin Franklin, was 70. While most guys his age were napping by the fire, Franklin was in Philadelphia starting revolutions. And the biggest signature, John Hancock. We talked about that, right? Who signed his name so large you could read it from orbit. Basically taunting King George to say, see, you don't need your glasses to see I signed my name. Come get me, big boy. So let's talk about the signers. Delaware. And I was going to actually point up the picture and point each one, but I figured that might take just a little bit longer time than I wanted to. You could go on to the Google machine or into an AI bot, and they will help you. But let's talk about the men. Delaware had 3 signers. Caesar Rodney, he rode 70 miles through the rain and thunder while sick with cancer just to cast the deciding vote for independence. George Reed, though cautious at first, he ultimately signed and stood with his colony and countrymen. Thomas McKean served tirelessly in Congress and later the Chief Justice of Pennsylvania. Speaking of Pennsylvania, they had 9 signers. Benjamin Franklin, he was a printer, inventor, diplomat, and one of the great minds of the Revolution. John Morton cast the deciding vote for Pennsylvania's declaration, ensuring independence was carried. George Clymer, that's Clymer for those of you who want to Google it, was a wealthy merchant who put his fortune at risk and signed both the Declaration and the Constitution. James Smith was a lawyer and militia leader, represented the frontier voices of Pennsylvania. George Taylor, who was an iron master, provided critical supplies for the war efforts. James Wilson, legal scholar, and later Supreme Court Justice and key framer of the Constitution. George Ross, uncle to Betsy Ross, remembered for his support in independence and family legacy. The Betsy Ross, right? The stars and stripes with the circle stars and stripes, right? The Betsy Ross flag. Robert Morris, the financier of the revolution, quote unquote, financier of the revolution. He risked his vast wealth to keep the war going. And Benjamin Rush, we've talked about him, doctor, reformer, and champion of education, medicine, and the abolition of slavery. Massachusetts had 5 signers. John Adams, fiery advocate for independence, future president, and guiding force of Congress. Samuel Adams, known as the father of America, the father of the American Revolution, helping ignite the movement for liberty. Got John Hancock, president of Congress, signed his name so boldly that the king would read it without spectacles. You got Robert Treat Paine, lawyer and patriot, worked for justice and order in the new republic. Elbridge Gerry, tireless public servant and later vice president of the United States. New Hampshire had 3 signers. Josiah Bartlett, who's a physician and the very first to vote for independence. William Whipple, I just love that. William Whipple, a merchant and brigadier general, freed the man he enslaved out of conviction for liberty. Matthew Thornton, Judge and Statesman lent his name to the cause despite joining Congress late. Rhode Island had 2 signers. Stephen Hopkins, elder statesman, his shaky hand signed boldly the words, "My hand trembles, but my heart does not." William Ellery, a lawyer who stood by every signer to witness their face as they pledged their lives. New York had 4 signers: William Floyd, farmer who sacrificed his home, which was destroyed during the war; Philip Livingston, a merchant and legislator, gave much of his fortune for the cause; Francis Lewis, his wife suffered greatly at the hands of the British, a reminder of the sacrifices his family endured. And other families endured. Lewis Morris, a patriot whose estates were ravaged, yet remained steadfast for independence. Georgia had 3 signers. Button Gwinnett is an amazing name. Like if I'm playing Harry Potter, right? Like the Harry Potter game, Button Gwinnett is a name I would probably use. Anyway, he was a statesman whose life was cut short in a duel, but whose signature remains immortal. Lyman Hall, a physician and later governor, guided Georgia through the war years. George Walton, one of the youngest signers, later governor and senator. Virginia had 4 signers. Thomas Jefferson, principal author of the Declaration, whose words continue to inspire freedom movements worldwide. Now let's use. All right, here we go. We got to use this every episode, right? Here we go.
Wythe.
George Wythe, esteemed scholar and mentor to Jefferson and others. Richard Henry Lee introduced the Resolution for Independence, the bold voice of Virginia. Francis Lightfoot Lee, Richard's brother, dedicated to liberty, though less remembered. Carter Braxton, a merchant who lost much of his fortune for independence. Benjamin Harris, a patriot of a family that would later give us 2 American presidents. Thomas Nelson Jr. ordered fire on his own house when it was held by British troops at Yorktown. Maryland had 4 signers. Charles Carroll of Carrollton, the only Catholic signer and longest lived signer of the Declaration, he reached 95. Samuel Chase, later Supreme Court Justice, staunch defender of liberty. William Paca, governor and judge, would work to establish Maryland's new government. Thomas Stone, lawyer and statesman dedicated to careful compromise and unity. North Carolina had 3 signers. William Hooper, lawyer whose home and lands were destroyed during the conflict. Joseph Hughes, a merchant who strongly supported the creation of the Continental Navy. John Penn, lawyer and legislator, faithful to the cause of freedom. South Carolina had 4 signers. Edward Rutledge, the youngest signer and later governor of his own state. Thomas Hayward Jr., captured by the British but endured steadfastly. Thomas Lynch Jr., though his life ended early, his commitment to liberty stood firm. And Arthur Middleton, captured and imprisoned but unshaken in his patriotism. New Jersey had 5 signers. Richard Stockton, imprisoned by the British, suffered greatly for his patriotism. John Witherspoon, a Presbyterian minister, the only clergyman, signer, and president of Princeton. What am I doing? That one was hard. Let's do that over. John Witherspoon, a Presbyterian minister, the only clergyman, signer, and president of Princeton. Francis Hopkins, artist and patriot, credited with designing America's first flag. John Hart, his family was forced to flee their home, and he died before seeing victory. Abraham Clark sacrificed much, including his sons, who suffered as prisoners of war. And finally, Connecticut had 4 signers. Roger Sherman, only man to sign all 4 founding documents: the Continental Association, the Declaration, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. Samuel Huntington, judge and governor, guided Connecticut through the war. William Williams, their parents weren't very creative, merchant and civil leader, gave generously to the cause. And finally, Oliver Wolcott, soldier and governor, helped lead both on the battlefield and in politics. So let's talk about what happened to these 56 men. And here's the part nobody likes to talk about. A lot of these guys paid the bill for putting their names on that piece of parchment. 5 were captured by the British and brutalized as prisoners of war. 12 of them had their homes burnt down. 17 lost their fortunes while fighting for the cause. And a number never recovered their health or standing after the war. This wasn't just sign and go home after, go home to the fireworks. It was a real risk for many, and the cost was everything. So let's talk about a couple of them. Take Thomas Nelson Jr. of Virginia. When the British occupied his home in Yorktown, they literally set up a headquarters in his house. And so what did Nelson do? He ordered the American cannons to fire on it. Oh, the redcoats are sipping tea in my living room? Cool. Blow it up. Right? That's commitment. Right? That's commitment to the America that we know and love today. Look at Richard Stockton of New Jersey. He was dragged from his home by British loyalists, beaten and imprisoned. His health was shattered, his property destroyed, and his fortune gone. He died broke, but he never renounced his signature on the Declaration. Francis Lewis of New York. The British seized his wife and held her in prison for months. By the time she was released, her health was ruined, and she died not long after that. Lewis gave everything. His property was destroyed, and his family shattered. John Witherspoon from New Jersey. He was a Presbyterian minister and president of Princeton. He saw the British burn his campus library, his life's work literally up in flames, and he stood firm, preaching that liberty was worth the price. And let's not forget John Hart of New Jersey. After signing, he fled into hiding while British and Hessian troops ravaged his farm. His wife died while he was on the run, and he couldn't even return home for her funeral. He lost his land, his health, and died in poverty not long after. These stories aren't happy endings, right? They're not the happy ending parts of our revolution. They are literally the receipts. This is what it cost. They show that it actually costs to pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And why does it matter? Because they weren't signing just paperwork. It was a declaration to Britain that the colonies into the world were not rebels hiding in the shadows. We're not begging for scraps of freedom. We are free men and we're willing to stand behind it publicly. Right? The act of unity that glued the 13 colonies together was difficult, but it held together long enough to win independence. And without those signatures, Jefferson's words on that page would have just been talk. With them, with those signatures from those men, it became a contract sealed in courage. Charles Carroll of Carrollton, right? He was the last surviving signer. He said this, I am the last surviving signers. I am the last of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and I do not regret having affixed my name to that paper, and I would do it again. And finally, Samuel Adams, he said at the State House in Philadelphia on August 1st, 1776, right after signing the Declaration of Independence and having it been adopted, he said, if you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go from us in peace. We ask not your counsels or arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. It's basically Samuel Adams saying to the fence sitters, pick a side. If you prefer the safety of Britain, fine. Don't ever expect to be remembered as Americans. I love it. I love that right there. Crouch and lick the hands that feed you. I love it. Man, that's such an awesome quote. But there you are. 56 patriots. Farmers, lawyers, doctors, merchants, ministers, rich and poor, young and old. Every one of them wrote his name knowing it could mean the gallows. Like I said, some lost fortunes, some lost families, some lost their health, but together they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, and they gave us the greatest nation on the earth. I really appreciate you listening this time. And remember, as I say all the time, history isn't boring. It's the story of 56 men with extraordinary courage who risked everything to sign their names to freedom. I'll see you next time.